Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something really fundamental to the human condition, nervousness and insecurity.
Yeah, definitely. And we've pulled together a lot of insights, from different fields to really get under the skin of these feelings for you.
Right. And our goal isn't just like definitions. We want to explore the surprising connections and, well, how they shape so much of our lives.
Think about it. Feeling butterflies before a date or questioning your abilities at work, these are incredibly common experiences.
Totally.
So our mission here is to give you a clear, engaging understanding of why these feelings pop up and the powerful ways they influence us. Might even uncover some unexpected stuff along the way.
Absolutely. So let's start with nervousness. We all know that jittery feeling, right?
Yeah.
But what's really going on beneath the surface, psychologically speaking?
Well, in everyday chat, nervousness usually just means feeling uneasy or worried. Psychologically, though, it's really closely linked to anxiety.
Anxiety, okay.
But here's a key thing. A little bit of anxiety can actually be, helpful. It's like a natural alarm system. Evolution honed it to keep us on our toes when we face challenges.
Huh. So that nervous energy before, say, a presentation, that could actually be giving us an edge.
Exactly. Yeah, it can sharpen your focus, motivate you. The crucial difference, though, and this is important, is when that normal response becomes excessive, persistent.
Right.
That's when it tips into an anxiety disorder. The worry is just way out of proportion to the actual situation, and it starts to really mess with daily life. It's not just passing worry. It can take over.
So it's about that tipping point, yeah.
Yeah.
Where it stops being useful and starts being, harmful.
Precisely. And there's also a difference in, what triggers the feeling. Anxiety tends to be future-focused.
About what might happen.
Yeah, exactly, what might happen. And that often leads to physical tension, maybe avoiding things. Fear, though, that's more of an immediate response to a clear present danger. That's your fight or flight kicking in. With problematic anxiety, the brain often overestimates threats. It starts seeing danger where maybe there isn't much or any, which really shows how much our thoughts, our cognitions play into it.
It's like the brain's on constant high alert for problems that aren't even there.
Right. And what's kind of fascinating, or tricky maybe, is that what counts as normal functioning or a proportional response isn't always clear-cut. Social norms, individual circumstances, they heavily influence these judgments. So understanding anxiety isn't, universal across all cultures or people.
So anxiety isn't purely internal. It's shaped by the world around us, too.
Absolutely. And it has such a wide range of effects. It touches our thoughts, our bodies, our actions, our emotions, everything.
Like how?
Cognitively, you might have fears of losing control or getting hurt, or maybe intense worries about how others see you. You could have racing thoughts, scary images popping up, trouble concentrating.
Wow.
Physically, anxiety can manifest as a pounding heart, shortness of breath, maybe dizziness, sweating, muscle tension, sleep problems, you name it. Behaviorally, that might look like avoiding situations, constantly needing reassurance, feeling restless, pacing, or even just freezing up. Can't speak.
Right.
And emotionally, the feeling itself can range from just feeling mildly nervous or tense, kind of wound up, to intense fear, being really edgy or jumpy, easily frustrated.
That really covers a lot of ground. It shows how anxiety can impact, every part of us. And there are different kinds, aren't there? Different diagnoses.
Yes, absolutely. The DSM-5, which is sort of the standard guide in psychology, lays out several main types of anxiety disorders.
Okay.
There's generalized anxiety disorder, or GD. That involves this persistent, excessive worry about, lots of different things: work, school, health, even minor stuff. And it often comes with physical symptoms like restlessness, fatigue, trouble concentrating, irritability.
Sounds exhausting.
It really can be. Then there's panic disorder. That's marked by recurrent, unexpected panic attacks. These sudden surges of intense fear that peak really quickly. Symptoms include palpitations, sweating, trembling, feeling like you're choking, chest pain, fear of losing control, or even dying.
Those panic attacks sound absolutely terrifying.
They are incredibly distressing for people who experience them. Then you have specific phobias, intense, irrational fears of very specific things, like heights, spiders, flying, needles.
Things many people dislike, but taken to an extreme.
Exactly. The fear is way out of proportion to the actual danger. Agoraphobia is another one. That's a fear of situations where escape might be difficult or help unavailable if you have panic-like symptoms. Think public transport, open spaces, crowds.
So it's not just fear of open spaces, but fear of being trapped in those spaces.
Pretty much, yeah. Fear of having symptoms and not being able to get out or get help. Then there's social anxiety disorder, SAD, or social phobia. That's a persistent fear of social situations where you might be judged or scrutinized, fear of embarrassment, rejection. Separation anxiety disorder involves excessive fear about being separated from people you're deeply attached to. And it can happen in adults too, not just kids. And selective mutism, mostly in children, is when someone consistently fails to speak in specific situations, like school, even though they can speak fine elsewhere.
It's really striking how differently anxiety can show up. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Exactly right. The impact of, say, a specific phobia is going to feel very different from the sort of pervasive worry of GAD. Understanding these types helps us appreciate the sheer variety of anxiety experiences and how they affect different parts of life.
Okay, so we've unpacked nervousness or anxiety quite a bit. Now, let's shift focus to the other side of our coin today. Insecurity. Psychologically, what does it really mean to feel insecure?
Insecurity, well, at its core, it's that feeling of inadequacy, of not being good enough. It's this lack of self-confidence, a sense that you're unable to cope with life's challenges. Often comes with a general uncertainty, too, about your abilities, your relationships, even your goals. You might feel it broadly across your life, or it could be more specific, like insecurity about your job or your body image, that kind of thing.
So it's that nagging inner voice telling you you're falling short somehow.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And it often gets amplified by other negative emotions. Sadness, loneliness, jealousy, envy, even self-loathing can feed into it.
And where does it come from? Is it always tied to something specific?
It can be multifaceted. Sometimes it stems from traumatic events or repeated negative experiences. Social conditioning plays a role, the messages we get from society. Life instability, certain personality traits, maybe even neurochemical predispositions.
Right.
And sometimes, honestly, there's no clear external cause. It can be complex.
The term inferiority complex often comes up in this context. How does that fit in?
Yeah. Inferiority complex is often used as a kind of umbrella term for those really chronic, pervasive feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. It leads to persistent self-doubt, low self-esteem, maybe withdrawing from social situations.
Right.
But it's crucial to remember that insecurity is ultimately a subjective self-assessment. It's how we see ourselves. And that view is really susceptible to our internal emotional states and, of course, the feedback we get from the outside world.
Right, right. And how does this feeling, this insecurity, actually manifest? What behaviors might we see? What are the signs?
Well, it can show up in a whole host of ways. Obvious ones might be low self-worth, a negative self-image. Communication difficulties are common, maybe finding it hard to express your own needs or always putting others first. You might see things like avoiding eye contact or apologizing constantly when it's not necessary. Trust issues can make it hard to build or maintain healthy relationships. Feeling overwhelmed by everyday stressors is another big one. Perfectionism can actually stem from insecurity, that feeling that your performance is never, ever adequate. Socially, it might lead to avoidance, preferring solitude, being overly critical of yourself and sometimes others too. In relationships, you might see anxious or avoidant attachment styles cropping up. And here's an interesting twist. Sometimes insecurity actually masks itself as superficial self-esteem or even overconfidence, like a defense mechanism.
So it can be quite hidden or even look like the opposite of what it is.
It's tricky.
Exactly. It's diverse, sometimes contradictory manifestations really highlight the different ways people try to cope with these underlying feelings. It makes recognizing it complex sometimes.
Okay, so we've looked at nervousness, anxiety, and insecurity separately. But as we said at the start, they often seem to go together. How exactly do they influence each other? What's the connection?
Oh, they're deeply intertwined. It's often a symbiotic relationship, you could say, where each one can fuel the other.
Well, think about it. If you feel fundamentally insecure about your goals, your relationships, your ability to handle things, that feeling can easily generate anxiety about those very things.
Makes sense.
That underlying sense of inadequacy kind of sets the stage for apprehension, especially when you're facing situations where you might be evaluated or tested.
So insecurity creates fertile ground for anxiety to sprout.
Precisely. And it works the other way, too. Anxiety itself can create or worsen feelings of insecurity.
Really?
Yeah. The constant worry, the physical symptoms, the fear that comes with anxiety. anxiety, it can really chip away at your self-confidence over time. It makes you feel less capable, less equipped to handle life, which just deepens those underlying feelings of not being good enough.
Wow.
Developmental psychology offers another lens here. We know that insecure attachment styles formed in early childhood can lead to both a core sense of insecurity and difficulties in managing emotions. And both of those are risk factors for developing anxiety later in life.
So those early bonds, or lack thereof, can really set a trajectory impacting both security and emotional regulation.
They certainly can lay a foundation, and often this leads to a sort of reciprocal escalating cycle, like a snowball effect.
Explain that a bit more.
Okay, so insecurity triggers anxiety. Then, the experience of being anxious, especially if it leads to negative outcomes, or if you interpret it as a failure, reinforces those initial feelings of insecurity.
Ah, I see.
Which then makes you more likely to feel anxious in the future. Remember the social anxiety example. Feeling socially insecure might make you anxious in social settings. That anxiety could lead to awkward interactions, or maybe avoiding them altogether.
Which then proves your insecurity was right.
Exactly. It confirms the insecurity, which then fuels more anxiety about the next social event. And without some kind of intervention, some way to break the pattern, this cycle can become really chronic and resistant to change.
It sounds like a really tough loop to get out of, a vicious circle.
It definitely can be. And that's precisely why understanding this tight connection between the two is so crucial if you want to effectively address either feeling.
Okay, fascinating. Now let's dig even deeper into the roots. We touched on biology briefly before. How do our brains, our genes, actually contribute to nervousness and insecurity?
Right, so our tendencies towards these feelings have really deep biological underpinnings. Specific brain regions are consistently implicated in anxiety. The amygdala, for instance, you've probably heard of it. It's central to processing fear and threat.
The brain's alarm center.
Kind of, yeah. And in anxiety disorders, it's often overactive, leading to exaggerated fear responses. Then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in higher order thinking and, crucially, emotional regulation. It helps put the brakes on the amygdala, basically.
Okay.
If that area isn't functioning optimally, it can be much harder to manage anxiety. The hippocampus, key for memory, helps us contextualize threats, learn what's actually safe versus dangerous. Reduced activity there is linked to some anxiety disorders. And the insula, which is involved in our awareness of internal body states interoception, overactivity there can lead to misinterpreting normal bodily sensations as dangerous, which is common in panic disorder. These areas don't work in isolation, they form a network processing thread.
So it's not just abstract thoughts, it's about how these specific brain structures are wired and how they're reacting.
Exactly. And this brain activity relies heavily on chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, and hormones. GABA, for example, is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It calms things down. If the GABA system isn't working right, anxiety can increase.
Is that what some anxiety medications target?
Yes. Benzodiazepines, for instance, enhance GABA's effects. They help apply that brake. Serotonin is another big one, crucial for mood regulation. Imbalances are strongly linked to anxiety. SSRIs work on serotonin levels. Norepinephrine is involved in the fight or flight response, arousal, alertness. Too much activity there is linked to increased anxiety and panic. Even dopamine, often linked to reward, plays a role in emotional regulation and seems implicated in social anxiety, affecting motivation in social contexts.
Wow, there are quite a few chemicals involved.
There are. And then there's the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's our body's main stress response system, releasing cortisol. Chronic stress messes with this system, leading to altered cortisol levels and increased sensitivity to anxiety. Prolonged activation can even cause structural changes in the brain areas we mentioned.
It's amazing how interconnected it all is. Brain structure, chemistry, stress response.
It truly is. And beyond these immediate processes, our genetics also play a significant part. We know anxiety disorders tend to run in families, suggesting a heritable component.
So it's partly in our genes.
Research suggests genetics might account for roughly 30 to 40% of the risk. Specific gene variations, often related to those neurotransmitter systems or the stress response, have been identified as increasing susceptibility.
But it's not deterministic, right? Like having a specific gene doesn't guarantee you'll get an anxiety disorder.
Absolutely not. That's a crucial point. Having these genetic predispositions doesn't seal your fate. It's the interplay, the interaction between our genes and our environment, what scientists call GXE interaction, that's really critical.
Okay, so genes load the gun Environment pulls the trigger.
That's a common way to put it, yeah. Early life stress, for instance, is a really potent environmental factor. It can interact with our genetic makeup through something called epigenetics.
Epigenetics.
Oh.
How does that work?
Think of your DNA sequence, your genes, as the hardware. Epigenetics is like the software that tells the hardware which programs to run when and how strongly. Environmental factors, especially early stress or trauma, can actually change the software. They can modify how genes are expressed without changing the underlying DNA sequence itself.
So experiences can change how our genes function.
Exactly. Things like childhood trauma or neglect can cause long-lasting epigenetic changes in genes involved in the stress response and brain development. This can lead to heightened stress sensitivity and increased vulnerability to anxiety later in life. So our genes might set the stage, but our experiences, especially early ones, really direct the play.
That's a powerful concept. It bridges biology and experience. And what about the evolutionary angle? Why would evolution even select for feelings like nervousness and insecurity? Seems counterproductive.
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, fear and anxiety aren't necessarily bugs, they're features. They're adaptive responses that helped our ancestors survive.
How so?
Fear is that immediate alarm, fight, or flight when facing present danger. Anxiety is more future-oriented, preparing us for potential threats. It makes us vigilant, cautious.
Okay.
Our brains seem to have an evolved fear module, heavily involving the amygdala, that's particularly quick at detecting threats common in our ancestral past: predators, heights, snakes.
Right, the biological preparedness idea you mentioned.
Right.
Easier to fear snakes than, say, electrical sockets.
Exactly. Anxiety's function, evolutionarily speaking, was to keep us scanning for potential dangers and ready to respond. Now, the problem is the modern world throws chronic psychological, symbolic stressors at us that these ancient systems weren't really designed for.
A mismatch.
Potentially, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Leading to maladaptive anxiety disorders. Even insecurity, especially social insecurity, fear of rejection, inadequacy likely has evolutionary roots. Belonging to a group, finding a mate, maintaining social standing, these were critical for survival and reproduction in our ancestral past. So sensitivity to social cues, while potentially leading to insecurity today, was likely adaptive back then.
So these feelings, however unpleasant now, might have actually helped us get here as a species.
That's the idea. While maybe not perfectly suited for modern life stressors, their origins likely lie in crucial survival mechanisms.
Okay, so we have biology, evolution, but our individual life experiences, especially early on, must also be huge factors, right? You mentioned attachment.
Absolutely crucial. Early life experiences are foundational. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby, really highlights the importance of that initial bond with primary caregivers.
How does that shape insecurity or anxiety?
Well, a secure attachment where caregivers are consistently sensitive, responsive, available helps a child develop a core sense of safety, self-worth, and confidence. They learn others are reliable. This fosters healthy emotional development and regulation.
And insecure attachment.
That happens with inconsistent, rejecting, neglectful, or even frightening caregiving. It leads the child to doubt the caregiver's availability, breeds anxiety, often results in a negative self-image, and hinders the development of good emotion regulation skills.
Are there different types of insecure attachment?
Yes. Anxious ambivalent attachment often results from inconsistent care. The child becomes preoccupied with the caregiver's availability, clingy, distressed by separation. Anxious avoidant attachment can stem from rejecting care. The child suppresses needs for closeness, appears overly independent. And disorganized attachment, often linked to frightening or abusive care, leads to contradictory behaviors, a lack of coherent coping strategies, and is a significant risk factor for later mental health problems, including anxiety.
So these early relationship patterns really lay the groundwork.
They form our initial internal working models of self and others, yeah. They become foundational for later insecurity, anxiety, self-esteem, and how we navigate future relationships.
Wow. And what about other major life events? Trauma, chronic stress.
They also have a massive impact. Trauma like abuse, neglect, accidents, violence shatters our sense of safety and can leave deep emotional scars, including persistent anxiety, hypervigilance, and profound insecurity. The stress response system stays chronically activated.
And chronic stress, like from work or finances.
That wears down our coping resources over time. It can lead to that HPA axis dysregulation we talked about, even changes in brain structure like the amygdala and hippocampus, increasing our biological vulnerability to anxiety.
So ongoing stress isn't benign.
Definitely not. And major adverse life events, loss of a loved one, divorce, job loss, serious illness, They disrupt our sense of security, challenge our assumptions about coping, and can trigger or worsen anxiety and insecurity, making us more apprehensive about the future. These experiences can literally rewire our stress responses and cognitive patterns. Anxiety and insecurity become learned responses.
Learned responses. How does that work?
Through basic learning principles. Classical conditioning, for instance. If a neutral situation, like being in a store, gets paired with a frightening experience, like a panic attack, the store itself can become a trigger for anxiety.
Pavlov's dogs, but with anxiety.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's operant conditioning. If avoiding a feared situation reduces anxiety, that avoidance behavior gets reinforced. You feel temporary relief, so you're more likely to avoid it again next time.
But that stops you from learning it might be okay.
Exactly. It prevents you from learning the situation might not be dangerous or that you can actually cope. And then there's social learning or observational learning. We learn by watching others.
So if we see our parents being anxious,
we might internalize those responses. Parental modeling of anxiety or being overly protective can teach children the world is dangerous or that social interactions are threatening. Belief systems about the world get passed down. Unpleasant social experiences can lead to learned social anxiety. Our environment, family, school, peers, society plays a huge role in shaping our propensity for nervousness and insecurity.
It really highlights the interplay between internal predispositions and external experiences. It's so complex. And our understanding itself has changed over time, hasn't it?
Oh, dramatically. Throughout history, anxiety and insecurity have been viewed through so many different lenses. Ancient texts, like in India thousands of years ago, describe symptoms remarkably similar to PTSD.
Really? That far back?
Yep. Greco-Roman thinkers, like Hippocrates, blamed humoral imbalances. Stoic philosophers, interestingly, recognized the role of negative thoughts and advocated managing them an early kind of cognitive perspective.
Fascinating.
Then the Middle Ages brought more religious or supernatural explanations. The 17th and 18th centuries had terms like melancholia or vapors. It wasn't until the late 19th, early 20th century that medical and psychological investigation really took off concepts like neurasthenia, Freud's ideas about unconscious conflicts.
And the modern classifications.
Those really started solidifying with the first DSM in 1952, and especially DSM-3 in 1980, which formally named many of the anxiety disorders we recognize today. Our understanding is constantly being reshaped by cultural, medical, and philosophical shifts.
And you mentioned culture influences the experience, too, not just the understanding.
Absolutely. Culture profoundly shapes how anxiety and insecurity are expressed and experienced. We see this clearly in what anthropologists call cultural concepts of distress or culture-bound syndromes.
Like what?
Well, there's Kial Kap, or wind attacks, found in Cambodia. It involves panic-like symptoms, but with specific cultural beliefs about wind rising in the body causing harm. Or Taijin Kyusho in Japan and Korea, a type of social anxiety. But the fear is about offending others through your appearance or actions rather than embarrassing yourself. It's very other-focused compared to typical Western SAD.
Interesting distinction.
And ataque de nervios, seen in some Latino cultures, intense emotional outbursts, often triggered by social stressors, seen as a culturally sanctioned way to express distress. Even for broader anxiety disorders, culture affects prevalence rates and how symptoms present. Somatic physical symptoms might be more prominent or interpreted differently in some cultures.
So a purely Western medical model might miss a lot.
It certainly can. Effective understanding and care really require cultural sensitivity. And beyond specific syndromes, broader societal factors matter hugely. Pressures around success, appearance, behavior standards, these create fertile ground for inadequacy and anxiety. Social norms, especially in tighter cultures with stricter rules, can exacerbate social anxiety because the fear of violating norms is higher. Workplace culture can promote safety or trigger anxiety. And then there's stigma.
A huge barrier you mentioned.
Massive. Public stigma, self-stigma, where people internalize shame, even structural stigma in policies. It leads to reduced hope, isolation, reluctance to seek help, worsening symptoms. It's a major problem exacerbated by crises like the pandemic, which increased social interaction anxiety for many. Societal factors are active contributors.
And gender. You mentioned women are diagnosed more often.
Yes, significantly more often for most anxiety disorders. Panic disorder, for example, is more than twice as prevalent in women. The reasons are complex, a mix of biological factors like hormones and brain chemistry differences, psychosocial factors like higher rates of interpersonal trauma, and gender role socialization. Traditional gender roles might encourage women to express fear or worry, while men are pressured to suppress it. Plus, women often juggle multiple demanding roles, leading to chronic stress. There might also be reporting biases. Women may be more likely to seek help, men less so due to stigma.
So it's not just biology, but how society treats gender.
Exactly. It's an interplay of biology, life experiences, learned roles, and societal responses. Understanding these gender dimensions is crucial for effective support.
It's clear these feelings aren't just personal problems. They're woven into the very fabric of our societies and histories, and they take a toll on individuals' mind-body beliefs. Let's talk about the physical health impact first.
Right. Chronic anxiety means that stress response system is constantly activated or easily triggered. Over the long term, this disrupts normal physiological processes.
Like what kind of issues?
Increased risk of cardiovascular problems, heart disease, hypertension, even stroke. Digestive system issues are very common: IBS, ulcers, headaches, both tension and migraine. Musculoskeletal pain, especially linked to job stress. Respiratory problems, shortness of breath, exacerbation of asthma. Sleep disturbances are almost universal. Weight changes, often gain, and even immune system dysfunction, making you more susceptible to infections.
Wow. It really hammers home that mind and body are not separate. What about other mental health ramifications?
Huge overlap. Insecurity is a known pathway to developing depression and anxiety disorders. And anxiety disorders themselves significantly increase the risk for depression. Substance use disorders often used as a way to cope, and tragically, suicidal thoughts and behavior.
They often occur together then, comorbidity.
Very high rates. For example, something like 68% of people with GAD have at least one other condition. It suggests shared underlying vulnerabilities, or maybe one disorder paving the way for another, like social anxiety leading to isolation, which then triggers depression. It definitely complicates diagnosis and treatment. Nervousness and insecurity are often major complicating factors in overall mental health.
And how do they shape our deeper beliefs?
Yeah.
Our worldview? Maybe even existential concerns.
Pervasive anxiety and deep insecurity can absolutely foster a worldview where life feels fundamentally threatening, unpredictable, fearful. Sometimes this is learned early on. Existential philosophers argue anxiety is inherent to the human condition, stemming from our freedom, responsibility, confronting meaninglessness.
Heavy stuff.
It is. And insecurity can amplify these existential anxieties, like death anxiety, the fear of dying, feeling insecure about life, about your ability to cope, while being aware of mortality. That can be an overwhelming combination. Nervousness and insecurity can become embedded in how we know the world and how we exist within it, shaping how we grapple with meaning, purpose, and our own finitude. Sudden loss, for instance, can precipitate a real existential crisis fueled by these underlying feelings.
It's like they color our entire perception of reality.
Oh.
And we talked about thoughts. Anxiety can really distort thinking, right? Biases, errors in reasoning.
Absolutely. Anxiety primes us to interpret ambiguous situations as threatening. That's called a negative interpretation bias. Common distortions include things like mind reading, assuming you know what others think negatively about you, catastrophizing, jumping to the worst possible conclusion, excessive self-focused attention, confirmation bias, only noticing things that confirm your fears, personalization, blaming yourself for things outside your control, overgeneralization, black and white thinking. Oh, the list goes on.
How does this affect things like risk assessment or decision-making?
Fear and anxiety drastically alter risk assessment. We tend to overestimate the likelihood and severity of negative outcomes, leading to increased risk aversion and avoidance. Decision-making gets compromised too. Stress makes novel decisions harder. The emotional system can overwhelm rational thought. Anxiety, especially GAD, is linked to problems with probabilistic reasoning, difficulty learning the actual likelihood of outcomes, tending to underestimate positive ones, which maintains worry. Negative moods in general impair logical reasoning and foster threat-confirming biases.
So the anxious thoughts feed anxious feelings, which reinforce the distorted thoughts. Yeah. Another cycle.
Exactly, which is why cognitive interventions like CBT specifically target these patterns. And finally, this all impacts our sense of agency, doesn't it? Our belief that we can actually do things.
Definitely. Insecurity and anxiety erode self-efficacy. That core belief in our own capability to manage situations and succeed is a cornerstone of motivation, performance, well-being. How does that play out?
Research, like in career development, shows a clear negative link. Feeling insecure correlates with lower self-efficacy and poorer self-management skills like planning or being proactive. It can become a loss spiral.
A loss spiral.
Yeah, low self-efficacy leads to lower motivation, maybe setting less challenging goals, giving up more easily when things get tough, recovering slower from failure. This often leads to poorer outcomes, which then confirms the initial low self-efficacy. That core feeling of not good enough attacks the very foundation needed to mobilize resources and pursue goals effectively. It really holds people back.
It's sobering how far-reaching these effects are. Now, let's broaden the lens again to interpersonal and social spheres. How do nervousness and insecurity fuel conflict in relationships?
They act as powerful catalysts. Minor disagreements can grow up because the underlying emotions, fear, insecurity, maybe echoes of past hurts are so intense. Often the surface argument, like about chores, is really a proxy for deeper, unexpressed insecurities or unmet needs, like feeling disrespected or taken for granted. Insecurity within a relationship itself creates imbalance. It can lead to preoccupation with a partner's flaws or an excessive need for reassurance, which might manifest as jealousy, clinginess, monitoring of behavior, overanalyzing everything. That's incredibly draining and conflict-prone. Even humor, if it's biting or sarcastic, used to cover up painful feelings, just exacerbates conflict. Addressing the underlying insecurities is key.
Makes sense. And in education, how does childhood anxiety impact learning?
It creates significant barriers. Anxiety disrupts the cognitive skills essential for learning attention, working memory, flexible thinking, problem solving. The brain's in fight or flight mode, not learning mode.
What does that look like in the classroom?
Could be inattention, restlessness, sometimes mimicking ADHD, attendance problems due to separation anxiety or school phobia, sometimes disruptive behavior, trouble answering questions because of fear of judgment, frequent visits to the nurse with physical symptoms, difficulty in specific subjects becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, perfectionism leading to not handing in homework, avoiding group work due to social anxiety.
So many ways.
Right. Socially anxious students might process less information because they're busy monitoring themselves. They're reluctant to ask for help. Even basic needs insecurity, like food insecurity, has a devastating impact on learning readiness, concentration, everything. Psychologically safe and supportive environments are crucial.
It really underscores the need for mental health support in schools.
Yeah.
What about the creative world? How do anxiety and insecurity influence art and media?
It's a complex, often paradoxical relationship. On one hand, these feelings, along with trauma, grief, societal pressures, can be a powerful source of inspiration. Art becomes a medium to explore, process, and express these difficult experiences. Feelings of defeat, rejection, existential dread, they fuel creation. It can be therapeutic.
Don't they there?
Excessive worry can be distracting. Perfectionism can paralyze the creative process, preventing completion. Fear of rejection can stifle experimentation and risk-taking. So it can both inspire the subject matter and inhibit the act of creating. Media portrayals, like in films, can be really helpful in raising awareness, reducing stigma, offering identification and hope.
A real double-edged sword. Now, zooming out to the collective level, how have collective anxieties shaped history, social structures, even wars?
They've been massive drivers. The search for security, the fear of insecurity, is arguably a key factor in many historical conflicts. Uncertainty about others' motives, fear of attack. Look at the lead up to World War I, for example. Us versus them thinking, often fueled by fear and insecurity, is ancient.
How does it shape societies more generally?
Collective threat, whether from resource scarcity, disasters, conflict, even pathogens, tends to lead to tighter cultures. Societies develop stronger norms, stricter punishments for deviation to promote coordination and survival. But these strict norms can also exacerbate things like social anxiety. Periods of intense collective anxiety can also spawn mass paranoia, witch hunts, scapegoating, where fear turns groups against each other.
And contemporary anxiety, like economic or climate anxiety.
Economic anxiety, fear of income loss, unemployment, inequality has huge impacts. Individually, it fuels stress, anxiety, depression. Societally, it's linked to things like rising authoritarianism, prejudice, nationalism. Some argue certain economic structures actively erode mental health and foster insecurity. And eco-anxiety or climate anxiety is a major emerging issue, chronic fear and distress about the ecological crisis. It affects mental health, particularly among young people, and can motivate action but also be paralyzing. Collective nervousness and insecurity are powerful engines, driving us towards conformity and cohesion, but also potentially toward hostility, conflict, and ideologies promising false certainty.
It connects the personal and the political so directly. And finally, how do these undercurrents influence communication itself? Things like gossip, misinformation, political polarization?
They deeply affect how we communicate and interpret information. especially in uncertain or threatening times when we're seeking simple explanations or validation. Gossip, particularly negative gossip, can sometimes be a projection of one's own insecurities. Job insecurity, for example, is linked to more negative workplace gossip.
And misinformation.
Emotionally charged information, especially fear-based, spreads faster and is believed more readily. Anxious or insecure individuals might be more susceptible, grasping for answers or certainty even if the information is false. Prolonged exposure itself increases anxiety and impairs critical thinking.
What about political polarization?
It often thrives on exploiting anxieties and insecurities, fear-mongering, us versus them rhetoric. Anxiety can increase biased information seeking, decrease nuanced thinking, and either drive people towards extremist ideologies that offer simple answers and belonging, or lead to disengagement altogether. Insecure individuals might cling tightly to partisan narratives for that sense of certainty and group identity. Individual nervousness and insecurity really scale up to affect our entire communication ecosystem, contributing to fragmentation, mistrust, and instability.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've really journeyed through the labyrinth of apprehension, haven't we? From definitions and manifestations, the intricate dance between anxiety and insecurity, their roots in biology, development, culture, history, right through to their pervasive impacts on us as individuals and as societies.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. We truly hope this exploration has given you, our listener, a richer, more nuanced understanding of these really fundamental aspects of being human. Hopefully it's a bit of a shortcut to feeling, well, genuinely well-informed on something that affects us all.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, maybe take a moment to reflect. Consider how your own vulnerabilities, the pressures around you, might shape your own experiences with nervousness or insecurity. And perhaps think about what small shifts, maybe in perspective, maybe in your environment, could create a positive ripple effect towards greater well-being.
Something to definitely think about.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
This is DigitView.